Hello, here follows a video which is primarily showing the students' fantastic journals, which they did in my zoology class working for Oxbridge academic programmes this July in Cambridge. And then I've chucked in a few other shots taken during the programme as well. So here we start with a lovely view on the first night of the empty Jesus College dining room. And the next shot is one of the free roaming cows in the city. This shot has all the flair in the world. Flair coming off the sunset, that is. I'm not claiming it's good. And now we move on to the first zoology journal. This one was by Adam. They were all very good students this year. Adam was memorable for the fact that all the wildlife kept trying to fly into his hair. And he clearly very much enjoyed topics including cuckoos, game theory, as well as ecological currencies, sexual selection, provision of offspring, natural selection, conservation, invasive species, insects, his wonderful pictures from the Cambridge Botanic Gardens, and then finally the zombie ant fungus, otherwise known as cordyceps, how species like cephalopods and chameleons change colour, and last of all the extinction of the Pleistocene megafauna, which was a topic he found particularly inspiring and haunting. So a wonderful journal, as they all were this year. It's hugely sad, and I first learnt about this way back in about 2014 in Professor Barmford's lectures, that at least 2/3 of the genera of large terrestrial animals, things like mammoths, saber-toothed cats, mastodons, etc., have gone extinct in the last 60,000 years or so, largely, but not entirely, driven by the activities of humans. Speaking of megafauna, one of the great group trips we did this year was firstly the public galleries at the Cambridge Zoology Museum, and then the behind the scenes in the insect room and the bird room at the same museum. I really didn't take enough pictures on this day. I don't know why, but there we are. But here is a wonderful one of the elephant bird egg collected by David Attenborough in about 1958 while making the Zoo Quest series. In that video, you can see him padding around aged, about 30 in his Converses and shorts. And then he stuck the egg fragments together with duct tape, and then much later had a professional restorer rebuild this remarkable egg. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But yes, the elephant birds went extinct around about 500 years ago, certainly during the second millennia AD, so it's quite a recent extinction. Next, we have some of the finches collected on the Beagle voyage by Charles Darwin, so remarkable historical specimens. And here we have the next journal by Chloe Bennett, and as you can see, she started off with zoology heroes, including Jane Goodall and David Attenborough and Mary Anning, which we'll come on to later. And then the behaviour and mating behaviour of African lions. Now cuckoos, she really enjoyed, wonderful things. And then group behaviour, followed by the Chatham Island black robin. This is famous for being a species that declined to only one pair, including only one female on Earth in 1980. And the recovery of this species up to a population in the low hundreds now is an amazing conservation story that took a huge amount of effort by the New Zealand Wildlife Service and frankly a huge amount of luck as well. The wonderful behaviour of the large blue butterfly and its parasitism of ants. She also really enjoyed the photography in the Botanic Gardens. That's a great photo of an emperor dragonfly there that she took. She then moved on to several types of insects, particularly those with full metamorphosis. Now we're moving on to some without full metamorphosis. And finishing off with the massively important group, which are the true bugs or Hemiptera, which include things like cicadas, kissing bugs, etc. Chloe then finished off by detailing our hugely enjoyable and successful trip to the Natural History Museum in London. Personally, I'm from the West Country, so I'm from central Devon, and I was introduced to the story of Mary Anning as early as the age of about 4. Mary Anning was a prolific and world-class fossil hunter in the early 19th century, born in the village of Lyme Regis, which has fantastic Jurassic deposits. And by the time she died, sadly in her 40s, she was certainly renowned throughout Europe as incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly capable of finding, at great physical risk, remarkable specimens. However, it being a very sexist world, it was usually the moneyed collectors, men, who would claim a lot of credit for discoveries, whereas in fact she had made the discoveries and then, or a lot of discoveries, and then had to sell those fossils on to make a living. But it remains a remarkable story, and here are several images of the ichthyosaur, which she discovered aged 12, which is absolutely remarkable. Moving on to the third of the 4 journals, and as you can see, I've tried to intersperse some trip photos in amongst these wonderful journals. This is Marlena's journal. Starts with reproductive behaviour in lions, a topic which lots of the students very much enjoyed. Next we have the cuckoos. You can see great drawings of a reed warbler, a cuckoo, and the fantastically named superb fairy wren here. And next we have breeding decisions with Lack's work on great tits and the salmon being a classic example of semel-paris breeding strategies paramount here. Next we have provisioning offspring, and I love the fact that the black-headed gull mother will over-provision later laid eggs with testosterone. And we think that's because it will make these smaller offspring better at begging aggressively for food, which will counteract their sort of later start in life. Next we have some game theory, including Hawk Dove and Prisoner's Dilemma, 2 of the classics. And followed by that is sexual selection, including the fighting of animals such as antelopes for mates. The next page includes some absolute classics of sexual selection. We have the Irish elk, which has the widest antlers that have ever known to have existed. They can get to 13 feet between one tip and the other. And then the stalk-eyed fly, which both has these completely ridiculous ornaments, whereby in some species the male's head can be 3 times as wide as the body is long. But also a lot of the seminal work on the theory of Fisherian selection was done on this species beginning with Wilkinson in the 1990s. Marlena too was very inspired and haunted indeed by the Pleistocene megafaunal extinctions, as Adam had been. And here we have initially some North American and South American species, followed by the diprotodon at the bottom, which is a giant wombat that may have weighed up to 2.8 kilos. I'd like to clarify that I actually mean 2.8 tons, of course. We have the effects of the mass extinctions on the first page, and then moves on to the reasons for them on the second page. And in very broad terms, the consensus seems to be that overkill by humans was the single most important factor in causing the extinctions as a whole. Certainly climate change in the form of ice ages and the warming periods after them would have been important in some cases. And we're not talking about anthropogenic climate change in this case. It's long before then. But to repeat that, yes, sadly overkill by humans was the most important factor in most of the extinctions of these remarkable animals. And you can see species like the moa, Haast's eagle, and the elephant bird, which I mentioned several minutes ago on this last page. Marlena then finished off into a deep dive of a couple of the conservation success stories organised by the New Zealand Wildlife Service in the late 20th century. We've seen the Chatham Island robin before, but to repeat the story briefly, this population got down to 5 individuals in 1980, only one of which was a female, and has recovered since then. And on the next page we have the kakapo, which was believed to be extinct for a reasonable amount of the 20th century. It was believed to be extinct. It used to be New Zealand's 3rd most common animal, but was very, very vulnerable to invasive cats and dogs and rats, but has now been resurrected as a species, or revived as a species, on a few isolated islands off the coast of New Zealand. And as with the Chatham robin, the population is now in the low hundreds. Still very, very endangered, but is no longer at critical risk of extinction in the next few years, as was the case for both species until recently. So wonderful success stories run by the New Zealand Wildlife Service under, at least for part of that period, the leadership of Don Merton. Before we move on to the last journal, which was by Max Bennett, we have a few little pictures here. One is of a beautiful natural prism shining through the glass at breakfast one morning. This happens quite often because it's such a sunny part of the world and a sunny time of year, but always nice to see as one tucks into one's coffee. Next we have a megalodon tooth, which I acquired for my own personal collection from a reputable source during the programme. And finally, we have some 19th century swallowtail butterflies collected in Cambridgeshire, and the observations in that book by Leonard Jennings, who noted down a huge amount of phenology, which is the timing of emergences of species. And from his notes, we can determine that 180 years ago, the swallowtail was very common in Cambridgeshire, whereas it is now completely extinct in Britain, except for in small parts of Norfolk. And last but certainly not least, we have Max's journal. And I'd like to apologise to Adam at this stage. These journals are being shown alphabetically. And when I did Adam's at the start of the video, I hadn't hit on the idea of sort of properly explaining each page in detail, because it takes a huge amount of time. So many apologies, Adam. It really is nothing personal. Max's journal starts with parental behaviour. And again, we see the black-headed gull. And we also have the yellow hornbill, which appeared earlier, but to explain that example, that's a species where one can remove the mother, who usually spends several weeks barricaded into the nest. And if the mother is present, then of the two chicks, each of them gets exactly the same amount of food. And the bigger chick will tend to smack its nest mate on the head maybe once or twice every hour. However, if you remove the mother, then the bigger chick gets 3/4 of the food, and it will smack its increasingly hungry and bullied sibling on the head about every 2 minutes. So you can really see the impact of the mother in removing obnoxious behaviour from the larger chick towards its younger sibling. Next, we have the fabulous shot that Max took of an emperor dragonfly laying eggs in the Cambridge Uni Botanic Gardens, with a common blue damselfly male pissing it off for some reason. No one I know is entirely sure why they annoy them, but there we are. And then we have game theory with, again, hawk-dove playing a prominent role. Some of these classic game theories have been shown to work in microbial evolution, because of course that is a vastly more convenient, vastly more rapidly moving, rapidly changing evolutionary model than the evolution of something as long-lived as, heaven forbid, a human or an orangutan or whatever, in which we really cannot study evolution in real time. Next is sexual selection, highlighting both the Fisherian idea, which is that attractiveness on its own sake will still be selected for, and also the handicap hypothesis, which suggests that for a male to be able to afford large ornamentation, like large antlers or a beautiful tail, he must genuinely have good, strong genes and therefore good, strong physical health. And so if a female chooses him, her offspring will inherit physical health genes that will promote strength and disease resistance and so on. So these are the two oldest seminal hypotheses about how sexual selection evolves. And speaking of sexual selection, next is Max's excellent picture of a male commendata. And this is a far more colourful and far more obvious in terms of its behaviour insect than the female, which is reasonably well camouflaged, although she is a pretty gold colour and doesn't sit on perches quite as obviously, asking to be eaten as the males do. Next, Max had a really good deep dive into the benefits of living in groups, which is one of the classic analyses or pieces of understanding in behavioural ecology. And on the facing page was his beautiful drawing of the large blue butterfly. The large blue butterfly went extinct in Britain in about 1980, but by that point it was realised that they depend on a particular ant species, which in turn depends on a reasonably high temperature, which is only available if the grass is cropped short. So if grass is suitably grazed, then the ant species should thrive, and the butterfly, which parasitizes this ant species absolutely brutally, will thrive as well. So when the common blue was returned to Britain from European stock, it did very, very well, and it is now more abundant in parts of Britain than in any other part of the world. I don't really have time to go into great detail about the common blue's breeding behaviour and how it parasitizes ants, but look it up yourself. It really is fascinating. Following that is a page on mimicry, including Batesian and Müllerian mimicry. The former is why a hoverfly will look like a wasp, and the latter is why a large number of wasp species will look very similar to each other. Both of these are under strong natural selection. Max followed this up with pictures of the melanic and the wild-type form of the peppered moth, which evolved for the first time, as far as we know, very close to where I work in Salford. After all, the Industrial Revolution began in Manchester. And next we have, sort of an introduction to evolution, and then Max moved on to one of the four most famous, most important causes of evolution, which is, of course, natural selection. A reminder, natural selection is not all there is to evolution. There is also drift, gene flow, and mutation, the four most important forces that cause evolution. And after this is a beautiful drawing of an atlas moth, one of the world's biggest and most spectacular insect species. Those beautiful wingtips on the forewings are believed, at least approximately, to perhaps be a Batesian mimic of the head of a snake, so maybe that might potentially repel predators. Next, Max really got into the history of the kakapo in the late 20th century. Some lovely drawings there. And then on to the two most plausible hypotheses for what caused certainly the majority of the Pleistocene megafaunal extinctions, those being climate change, in this case not human caused, and overkill. And in the majority of cases, most people think that overkill was the most important factor, on average at least. Coming beyond the midpoint of this last journal, we have the importance of invasive species, which are regarded, I believe, as the second most important cause of extinctions globally. At the moment, the view of conservationists is that habitat loss is the most important, followed by invasives and followed by climate change. But the relative importance of those will change in the next few decades. And Max followed this with a fantastic drawing of the spectacular Raja Brooks birdwing, which I would thoroughly recommend you look up online. There's one of them on my wall, on my stairs. A beautiful, beautiful thing. Very near the end now. It's been a long video, but I have enjoyed trying to explain some of these topics in a little bit of depth, although certainly I have nothing like enough time to explain all of them. But anyway, here we have insects, and in particular their physiology, and that there are primarily two forms. There are the endopterygotes, which have full metamorphosis, otherwise known as a pupal or chrysalis stage, and the exopterygotes, where they don't have metamorphosis, and each stage looks a little bit. But the key ecological benefit of the endopterygote is you can have full specialization for eating in the larval form and full specialization for reproduction and dispersal in the adult form. Hence the stunning success of orders including the Diptera, the Lepidoptera, the Hymenoptera, and the Coleoptera. Max then shows us his excellent photo of a mallard in the Botanic Gardens with a beautiful reflection on this smooth water. The students very much enjoyed the photography, and I was able to lend them some camera equipment, and all of them got a good view, and most of them got good shots of, for example, dragonflies laying eggs, so it was really spectacular. And finally, we have the extended phenotype, perhaps the most famous example being the zombie ant fungus, otherwise known as cordyceps. Certainly Cordyceps unilateralis, based on a paper published by Anderson and colleagues in 2010, it makes its infected ant climb about 1/2 metre up a sapling and then find a leaf that faces north-northwest, and only then will it jab its jaws into the main rib vein on the underside of the leaf and die. And that height has been shown to be essential for successful development of the fungus, because if it's on the forest floor, it'll likely be washed away or eaten. And if it's much higher than 0.5 metre, the climate up there is too hot and too dry for successful fungal development. So getting that height right is absolutely essential. And it's amazing that this so-called mind control by the fungus of the ant has done that job so well. In terms of the north-northwest angle of those leaves that it chooses, that's probably to do with light and shade and suitable temperature, which is the whole point in getting the altitude right as well. So many thanks for watching this. So hopefully you got to the end. I'm not sure I've struck the balance between explanation and video length, but there we are. And I hope you have a great weekend. Bye.